We continue our series today on multipolarity that's rising around the world, and we're looking at some of the poles that are forming in this hemisphere. We're going to go to Esteli, Nicaragua, and speak with journalist Stephen Sefton, and we're going to talk today about two organizations that have formed in the last 3 decades, Mercosur and CELAC, that help the various countries of Latin America and the Caribbean stand tall on the world economic stage. So, Stephen, let's take a sort of a tour of the landscape of the various organizations and structures that have been put together, really, I guess, since the election of Hugo Chavez, some of it a little earlier than that are both expressions of multipolarity and I guess part of the architecture of building that, and also the same for integration that's been going on, across the economies, the social, the cultural aspects of the entire region. So maybe start with whichever one of those organizations you want to start with.
Well, and I think the oldest organization that has offered an opportunity to countries in Latin America and the Caribbean to work together and coordinate, in particular, their economic policies is Mercosur. And Mercosur was founded, I think, sometime in the 90s, and that includes the 4 southern cone countries of South America, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay. And that is the oldest organization, which has had quite a checkered history in terms of its development, and is currently undergoing a crisis because Uruguay, the smallest member, and of course it includes Paraguay. In fact, I think Chile is an observer organization. It's not a full member. I think Bolivia is a full member, but that has been very problematic over the last few years, and because we can all remember the 2019 coup and the implications of that. And even Venezuela was allowed to be a full member some years ago, but that was put on hold by the reactionary governments of Mauricio Macri in particular, and the reactionary government in Paraguay. They blocked Venezuela's full participation in Mercosur. I don't want to spend too much time on Mercosur, but it's just worth pointing out that Brazil and Argentina, in particular, of obviously being the probably the 2 biggest economies apart from Mexico in Latin America, and they are engaging in a process right now of negotiating bilateral trade in their own currencies and not using the dollar, which they did before. So that's an important development inside Mercosur. Uruguay is trying to break ranks and sign a unilateral free trade agreement with China, which they're not allowed to do under Mercosur rules, and it's not at all clear how that's going to pan out. And the Uruguayan government has taken a lot of flack from in particular Brazil and Argentina over its unilateral position on that issue. And also Mercosur has had great difficulty negotiating an agreement. I'm not even sure that it has in fact negotiated its trade agreement with the European Union, but that's Mercosur, and it's an organization that reflects the to and fro between right-wing and progressive governments over the years. And currently it has, as I said, this crisis involving disagreements with Uruguay about trade with China.
Just so you know, on with the EU, the current status in June 2019, the agreement, EU-Mercosur Free Trade Agreement, was confirmed, which opens 100% of EU trade and 90% of Mercosur trade, but that has not been ratified as of today yet.
Right, and that's what I figured. It's not entirely formalized, and it has been a source of great contention between the European Union and, in particular, Brazil and Argentina, I think. Anyway, so that's the oldest organization, but among the most important organizations, of course, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, by its Spanish acronym, and that was really an astonishing development given the overall context of the region, because it was promoted principally by Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro back in 2009, 2010, 2011. And I think it finally came into being around 2010, 2011. I'm sorry, I'm not great on the actual dates.
February 2010, yes.
Right. So, and that was, what was so interesting about that is that CELAC brings together all varieties of ideology and the governments that subscribe to those different ideologies. So you had a right-wing government in Mexico, you had a relatively right-wing government in Chile, you had right-wing government in Peru, and they all agreed to bury their ideological difference because they all recognized the importance of setting up a regional body for Latin America and the Caribbean that would be capable of fighting its own corner as a region with, for example, in trade negotiations with the People's Republic of China, in negotiations with the European Union, and in all kinds of negotiations with those kinds of bodies. ASEAN, the Asian group, for example. And it was what was so interesting about it is that even though there were deep ideological differences between many of the leading figures, the political figures in the governments, in the regional governments concerned, they did manage to reach that agreement. And although I think it's true to say that around 2015, and then with all the changes in Brazil from 2016 to 2018, the election of Jair Bolsonaro took Brazil out of CELAC, and he also took Brazil out of the South American organization UNASUR, right, which was the South American organization that was very, very important. I think it was founded back in 2006, 2007. And that organization was very important in maintaining stability in South America, for example, in the case of Bolivia, which was subject to extreme destabilization attempts by the United States and its local allies, in particular the so-called Media Luna right-wing extremists, right, who were so prominent in the 2019 coup. But back in 2008, Evo Morales was able to appeal to the governments grouped in UNASUR to help promote stability in Bolivia, and he got very strong support, in particular, of course, from Argentina, but also from Brazil, Lula in Brazil. And that was a key component in maintaining Bolivia's stability at that time and subsequently. So then, in a more political key, because it's important to understand that those organizations, CELAC and UNASUR, were organizations that deliberately set out to overcome ideological differences so as to promote regional unity and strengthen the economic clout, if you like, or the economic possibilities of the region vis-a-vis big bloc negotiators like the European Union, like the United States, Mexico, and Canada with their free trade area agreement for North America, with China, ASEAN, and so on.
And it does, too. You have 32 countries with a combined GDP of $7 trillion a year. It's the third largest economy in the world.
Yeah, and although it's not in terms of population, obviously it's much smaller than Asian countries like India and China. It does have a population of, 730 million people, something like that.
Plus million,
so it's kind of twice the population of the United States, and somewhat half the size again of the European Union population.
Okay, so we're going to have to wrap it up here. We have so far we're starting with these two, Mercosur and CELAC, and both really world-class groupings that, in a global economy, these are poles in the global economy, and just becoming so. It's going to be much more important going forward. And so next week maybe we can pick up on some of the other organizations and groups that have been formed.
In particular, ALBA.
Very good. ALBA was very key. That's the child of Chavez, correct?
Right, Chavez and Fidel.
Van Fidel, that's correct. Okay, Stephen, thank you very much, and we'll speak with you again next week.
Okay, you're very welcome, Don. Look forward to it.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.